What's going on, guys? I'm Tommy, and I'm coming at you with an action figure review. Today I'm going to be reviewing Hasbro The Black Series, Sandtrooper Sergeant, Crimson Stormtrooper, Lieutenant Oxixo, and R2-Q5 4-pack. I started heavily collecting the Black Series around 2019-2020, and because of that there were a lot of releases that I've missed out on, and so I've been backtracking over the last 5 or so years. This was one of the last pieces that I wanted to add to my collection that was an older release. I found this at ICCCon 2024, the best Star Wars collector convention that there is, and I found this, got it for a great price. I think I got this for 60 bucks at the convention. This was originally an Entertainment Earth exclusive, and obviously it's been out for some time now. As far as I know, this is unique packaging for a 4-pack, as Black Series in general didn't do too many 4-packs at that time. They still don't do too many 4-packs to this day. Up at the top here you have your Black Series logo. In the middle you have an Entertainment Earth exclusive sticker on the top right. You have nice individual plastic windows for each of these guys with some interesting little black kind of slanted line printing on each window as well. You have your Sandtrooper, your Stormtrooper, your TIE Pilot, and your Astromech. Down below that you have some black and white illustrations for all the characters here, as well as their names in a couple different languages for a couple of them. On this side of the box, I'm trying to get a good angle on that, there's not much to show. It's just the names of the characters listed there again. On the back of the box we have again our Black Series logo. We have those same illustrations that we saw in the front of the box blown up a little bit, and we actually have individual bios for each of these characters. For the Sandtrooper Sergeant, Imperial Sandtroopers carry out the will of the Emperor in the harsh, arid environments of the galaxy's desert worlds. For the Crimson Stormtrooper, specifically trained for operations in the extreme temperature of volcanic areas, these crimson-clad stormtroopers stay cool in the heat of battle. For Lieutenant Oxixo, Lieutenant Oxixo piloted one of the 4 TIE fighters shot down while pursuing the Millennium Falcon during its escape from the Death Star before the Battle of Yavin. And for R2-Q5, entrusted with the secrets of the Emperor himself, this Imperial R2 unit once thwarted a plot to turn every droid aboard a second Death Star against the Empire. Down at the bottom you have your legalese. Please guys, don't think about feeding these action figures to your babies. On this side you got just a little bit of a wraparound window. On the bottom of the box you have even more legalese down here, and then at the top of the box just individual windows here to let the light in for these figures. Now that we've covered the packaging, let's get this cool set open so we can check out the figures. Alright guys, here are the figures out of the box. Before we take a look at them, let's first take a look at the accessories that they come with. Our Sandtrooper Sergeant comes with a ton of accessories. He'd actually probably be considered a deluxe figure to today's standards. He's got that backpack that a lot of the Sandtroopers have in A New Hope. It's got some really nice sculpted detail, as well as just a few paint hits in this almost like, I don't know what color to call this, like almost like a teal, a bluish green color, and then you have some white here on this end of it. On this side here, you do have a peg to plug it into the back of the figure, and there is this little ammo pouch piece that's going to go over the figure's shoulder. This even has some paint applications here for the buttons on the ammo pouches. All in all, it's a great accessory and an iconic part of the Sandtrooper look. The Sandtrooper also comes with 3 different weapons. I believe, I could be wrong, this one is the T-21. Please correct me if I'm wrong. This one has a lot of paint applications to it, which is nice. It's done in a black sculpt, and you'll see it's got paint applications here at the stock and the grip of the weapon. It's got a little bit of gold here, as well as some dark gray leading up to the barrel. And then down here, the strap is also painted with a little bit of gold on the buttons there. All in all, a great accessory and a very nicely painted one as well. The second weapon option for the Sandtrooper Sergeant is the DLT-19. This is a great blaster here. This one actually has a little bit of a silver kind of dry brushing wash on it. Looks really, really nice on that black sculpt, and it adds a lot of character to the blaster. I wish Black Series would do this more with blasters in the line right now. And then of course right here we have the classic E11 blaster rifle. You have just a little bit of paint here, a little bit of silver in the center here, but aside from that, it is just black sculpted plastic. And if you have a Stormtrooper in your collection, I'm sure you know what you're getting with an E11 blaster rifle. And it's kind of funny, as we move left to right here, the accessories get less and less plentiful on these guys. On our Crimson Stormtrooper here, he comes with a sniper rifle here. This one seems to be done in more of a grayish, like a gunmetal gray sculpt with that same silver dry brushing to it. This looks really, really good. And again, I'm really happy that they put a wash on some of these weapons. Just really helps them pop on the shelf. Our Crimson Stormtrooper comes with the same E11 blaster rifle that the Sandtrooper Sergeant comes with, so I'm not really gonna cover that anymore. And of course, Lieutenant Oxixo, his only accessory is that same exact E11 blaster rifle. And of course, R2-Q5 does not come with any accessories. Alrighty, moving left to right, let's start off again with the Sandtrooper Sergeant. So this guy is on the Sandtrooper sculpt, which a lot of Black Series OGs consider to be one of the best Black Series sculpts in the line. One of the things I really want to point out on this figure is the incredible wash that he has on him. This wash is not digitally applied, it is not inkjet, it is completely done in a painted wash, and it looks great. The color they chose to emulate the sands of Tatooine look awesome, and it's covered head to toe. The back of the figure, look at this. This is the piece on the back here that gets covered up by that backpack, and they've weathered it even harder than most of the other pieces of the armor, because it makes sense. That's where most of the grime is going to get into. The crevices, the nooks and the crannies of the armor, that's where you're going to see the most weathering, and it's done very, very nicely. I do prefer the Sandtrooper helmet over the original Stormtrooper helmet, which it seems that our Crimson Stormtrooper does have the Sandtrooper helmet sculpt, not to jump ahead, but I actually do prefer this helmet sculpt, I think, even over the current Stormtrooper helmets that we get in the Black Series right now. It's just sculpted perfectly. I think the proportions are done perfectly, and look at the paint applications on this thing. You have black at the lenses, that black brow, you have little bits of that bluish color with some black for the different kind of pieces of the helmet. You have the blue stripes painted here, the grill area is painted, the chin filters are painted as well. So many paint applications just on the helmet. You have pieces on the back that are painted. This figure looks fantastic. He does of course have the white on the pauldron for the sergeant rank, and aside from that, there's not too much else as far as paint applications go. He's going to have some buttons painted on the ammo pouches on his waist, but again, with Stormtroopers, you should not expect much painted detail, which is why I'm always happy when we do get the extra things like the washes and the painted details that we do get, because these guys are so plain and it's great to get those added details. As far as our Sandtrooper goes for articulation, he's going to have a ball and hinge at the head, which is going to give you some great range. Lets him look down quite a bit as well as up quite a bit too. He's going to have some tilt there at the head, which is great, as well as some right and some left. Obviously, all of these figures predate the existence of butterfly joints in the line, so these guys are going to have some dated articulation in that way. He does, however, have a hinge and swivel at the shoulders. He can get his shoulders up to about 45 degrees, and they can, of course, swivel a full 360 degrees. He does feature a bicep swivel, as well as some pinned double jointed elbows. You guys know I'm really not a fan of the pinned double jointed joints in this line. However, this guy's able to get more than 90 degrees on that bend, which is awesome. And then he has a hinge and swivel at the wrist. So on that right wrist, it's going to be a vertical hinge and swivel with that trigger finger hand. And then at the left wrist, it's going to be a horizontal hinge. He's got a ball joint to the midsection here, which is also going to give you some great range. And he's also got some ball joints down here at the hips. Those are going to have some decent range to them as well. He has a cut for a thigh swivel that's hidden underneath the thigh armor there. It's going to be a little tight because this is an older figure. He's been sitting in a box for about 10 years now. He's got pinned double jointed knees. These are, again, very ugly, but they can get a very, very good range of motion. However, from the front, they just don't look very aesthetically pleasing. And down at the ankles here, of course, he has that forward-facing pin for rocker, as well as a hinge, which gives you a little bit of forward and a little bit of back. Actually, some great range on that ankle hinge. Something I'm noticing before I finish up with this figure here is, if you look here, the belt is not placed onto the figure properly. It is not attached. It's glued into place. However, it's not completely attached. I'll use the Crimson Stormtrooper for reference. Look at that. That belt is not glued on properly. Interesting. I've never noticed that. I've had this for several months now before I've opened it, and I've never noticed that, so it's a very interesting little touch there. Might be worth heating the figure up and fixing that, because that's something that I definitely would want to fix on this figure. Taking a look at the Crimson Stormtrooper here, this guy's going to be a lot more plain than our Sandtrooper Sergeant. He is done in a very vibrant red sculpt. The vibrant red is very cool. He's going to pop very nicely on the shelf, especially near some of my Royal Guards for my Imperial display. And essentially, this is the exact same figure as you get with the Sandtrooper Sergeant. It's just that the sculpt is done in a different color. You've got some of the buttons on the waist section here that are painted, and you have lots of paint apps all over the helmet. A lot of the same hits the Sandtrooper had, just in some different colors here. You'll notice as I'm spinning the helmet around here, it's a lot more kind of gray and black as opposed to that bluish color that we saw on the Sandtrooper. And again, aside from that, there's not really anything in the way of paint applications on this figure. And I'm actually also not even going to bother showing you the articulation on this guy, because again, it is exactly the same as the Sandtrooper. The one difference here is that you do have some gray paint applications on the thermal detonator on the back of the belt, as well as a holster for the blaster rifle. So we might end up giving this guy the sniper rifle and have his E11 in the holster here. Taking a look next at Lieutenant Oxixo, this is essentially just a TIE pilot. So if you have any TIE pilot figures or any figures on the TIE pilot sculpt in your collection, you should know what you're getting into here. Lieutenant Oxixo has some very, very nice paint applications. Up here on the helmet, he's got some really nice silver, the printing for the Imperial cogs, as well as the little design on the fin of the helmet. Aside from that, the helmet is completely barren, aside from the little silver hits on the side. The tubes are interesting because they do unplug. So if you want to pose the helmet around, I think this is actually really smart, because you can take them out, pose the head however you want, and then you can place the tubes back into the helmet as you please. It kind of keeps the tubes from, you know, getting pulled too much and ripping out and tearing, and that's a very frustrating thing with characters with tubes on their arms or helmets in this line. The chest box has a lot of paint applications too. You got some white, some gray, some red, and some blue. Lots of detail here, and I think it's great that for such a plain character, Hasbro does go that extra mile with the paint applications that they can make on these figures. He's also got some Imperial cogs in silver on each shoulder here, and then on that left arm, he's got a little bit of paint application again with that bluish color we've seen a couple times now, that gray color, some red, some black, and some white. The belt is going to be a loose overlay here. The buckle is painted silver, as well as the little button to the right of the buckle, and then you can see as well, he's got another holster for a blaster. Aside from that, that's literally it as far as the paint applications go. This guy just has lots of sculpted detail, and the color of black that they chose does a really good job of catching the light to really bring out a lot of that sculpted detail in the flight suit. All right, taking a look at Lieutenant Oxixo's articulation, you've got a ball and hinge at the head, so with that you can get just a little bit of down, and you can also get some up. The up is actually really nice on this one. You can get maybe just a tiny bit of tilt, as well as some right and some left. He's got, again, the hinge and swivel shoulders. The shoulders are going to get you to about 90 degrees on that hinge, and then there is that swivel which gets you a full 360 degrees. He's got some deep cut single jointed elbows, which will get you to that 90-degree mark of bend, and then at the wrists here, he does have the hinge and swivels. He has a horizontal hinge at the right wrist with that trigger finger in hand, and he has another horizontal hinge at the left wrist. He's got a ball joint at the midsection, which doesn't give you like any range at all, which kind of sucks. He has some ball joints at the hips, which have some really, really nice range. He has a cut for a thigh swivel about mid-thigh here, which has some good range as well. Again, we return to the ugly pinned double jointed knees, but I'm not going to knock on them on this release because this is a 10-year-old release at this point. And then of course, just showing you again from the front, they're just not very aesthetically pleasing. At the ankles here, you do have that forward facing pin for rocker, as well as a hinge, which gets you just a little bit of forward and just a little bit of back as well. So overall, this is pretty standard for the articulation scheme for, I think, 2015 when this came out. So pretty typical back then, and it definitely makes me appreciate what we have now as far as articulation goes. And last but certainly not least, we move to R2-Q5. Now, since the release of this review, there's already been a new astromech sculpt that I've gotten several times over in the Black Series, so this is the older, undersized astromech here. I love the paint job on this, though. I love the color scheme with that almost like coppery color that they've given to all the different panels and such. You got a little bit of a khaki color down here at those front cables, and some silver here at the little legs. Lots of different paint hits all throughout, lots of silvers, lots of that coppery color, and they've actually painted this figure up really, really nicely. This is not, I don't think you'd get nearly as many paint apps now as you would back then. As far as the features on this guy go, he does have a little piece on the top of his head that does remove. It looks like actually a couple of these panels remove. It looks like 3 of them come out of his head. I don't know what you would do with those because there's nothing to attach. However, you can also, there's a little toy gimmick, the Happy Meal gimmick, where you spin the head, the third leg comes out, and then you're able to kind of pose him in that kind of rolling pose. You can also open up the doors on the front of the figure here, and that gives you access to some of the tools. You do have to manually pull the tools out, which can be a huge pain in the ass if you have fat fingers like myself, but once you get them out, they do look very nice. Aside from that, you do have some hinges down here at, I guess I would call these the ankle joints of the astromech droid, and you do have some swivels at the tops of the legs here. These do move a full 360 degrees, and that's pretty much all you get for this guy. How about we get these guys posed up with their accessories so we can get them posed up as a nice little team here. So the Sandtrooper being our most involved, you'll see that cleverly in his back here, he does have a peg hole that matches up with the peg on the back of the backpack. All you're gonna do is slide this over his back, match it up, and you're gonna have it so that the ammo pouches are hanging over his left shoulder, and they do have a little swivel there so you can spin them around, and they're gonna sit a little loosely. I'm sure that you can kind of mess with them if you'd like. And the nice thing about this accessory is that even though it's so large, it's not too back heavy. He can still stand up straight with it on. First, we'll give our Sandtrooper the E11 blaster rifle here. This is gonna fit nicely into the hand. Once you can kind of wedge the blaster into the hand there, you'll see that it's got a nice firm grip. It's gonna pass the shake test. You'll see he also holds this blaster really nicely in 2 hands. As for the T21, usually with these blasters with the straps on the bottom, I do like to have the strap on the inside of the hand here. It does snap nicely into the hand for the trigger finger hand there. Passes the shake test again. This one you can't really get into a two-handed pose just because of the width of the barrel of the blaster and how tight that offhand is there. You're not going to be able to fix that hand to the bottom of the blaster, so he can't really hold it in a two-handed pose and have it look accurate, but he can still hold it in the one hand and it'll look pretty cool nonetheless. We're probably going to be opting for this heavy rifle here, and this fits again, just like the other two, nicely into that right hand there. Passes the shake test, no problem at all. Our Sandtrooper can also hold this blaster in a two-handed pose fairly easily, and we'll be able to pose him up in a nice little low-ready stance, getting ready to maybe knock out some rebels on Tatooine. This looks really cool. As for our Crimson Stormtrooper here, we'll first give him his technically sidearm here, the blaster rifle, the E11 style. Because he's the same sculpt as our Sandtrooper, he's going to hold that blaster very nicely. Passes the shake test as well. And we can give him a very A New Hope-esque, kind of original trilogy style blaster holding pose where the Stormtroopers tend to have it a little bit lower to their sides. This actually looks like a really cool pose. And then of course this blaster does have some weapon storage. You can stick this into the holster very nicely. This does pass the shake test in the holster with just friction, so that's great. And then getting that kind of sniper rifle into the hand. It does fit into the right hand, not the most firm grip, but it's still going to pass the shake test for you. And you can get this into a two-handed blaster holding pose very, very easily for this guy too. As for Lieutenant Oxixo, he does have the ability to hold his blaster in his right hand, as he does have that trigger finger hand there. The trigger finger slips nicely into the trigger guard, and he's going to pass the shake test too. While a little finicky and it kind of looks a little bit bulky and a little off, it can get him into a two-handed blaster holding pose. However, I do prefer with my pilots to have the blasters in the holster. This again, just like the Crimson Stormtrooper, fits nicely in there with friction. It's not going to fall out. And here's everybody in this 4-pack, including our astromech, in an awesome one-legged pose. They're getting ready to run to their respective battle stations for an impending rebel attack. And that about wraps it up for this review of this pack. This is a super cool pack. The figures are very dated in their articulation. However, they make up for it with the paint apps and just pure cool factor. These are all characters that have not been recently released for the Black Series line, so if you want any of these characters, it might be worth picking up this pack on the aftermarket. And with that said, guys, I hope you enjoyed enjoyed this review. If you did and you're not yet subscribed, subscribe to Blitz Transmissions. I've got awesome Star Wars content coming out all the time. Make sure to check out my social media, all of which is linked in the description below. That's going to be all for this review, guys. I'll catch you for the next one, and may the Force be with you.